If you've been playing Honkai Star Rail throughout 2024, there's a high chance you've seen a video or discussion on power creep. Considering most plays came directly from Genshin Impact, a game that sees comparatively less of an increase in power scaling from patch to patch, the rate at which the needle gets pushed in Star Rail can definitely come off more jarring to players. From my experience being a day 1 player, I think the first ever instance of people bringing this up was when Fushuan came out, as she would totally eclipse Japard in tanking capabilities while even giving Luocha a reason to sweat for offering healing of her own. Shortly after came Jingliu, who at the time was a strict upgrade over many other existing DPS characters, one of which being her quintet comrade, Blade. Discussion was further brought up when Huohuo came out, being the second featured healer and one who noticeably outstripped Luocha in utility. From then on, the rest is history. Patch after patch, since 1.6, it felt like every pair of characters would supersede a character that came before. Black Swan, Sparkle, Akron, Aventurine, Robin, Firefly, Jade, Yunli, Jiaoqiu, feixiao, and lingsha. A mere surface glance observation of these characters compared to the 5 stars of old, and even the 4-star characters like Gallagher, March 8, and Harmony MC if you consider them a 4-star, there's a significant leap in power and range of features in those units. It's perfectly understandable why discussion over power creep has been growing over time, as it correlates to the exhaustion of keeping up with all the new characters. Now, having made a video on this myself back in 2.0, I wanted to revisit the topic now that we have more characters to work with, but instead of talking about power creep specifically, which we all know is decidedly relevant, I want to bring up a different point of discussion. Is Honkai Star Rail releasing too many characters? And more specifically, should the frequency of new releases be a bigger point of concern over how strong they're becoming? Power and feature creep are inevitable in live service games, none more so than in gachas. Considering units are meant to be pulled for with a rarity sparse enough to where in most titles you're pressured to spend money to acquire more premium currency than you're given for free, there needs to be a clear incentive to do so. In completely free-to-play games, you're more likely to mess around with new content even if they're not necessarily better than existing stuff because you're not paying a price to obtain them. But even for those games, you still want to have a trait distinguishing the new from the old, and what most games usually do is make that new content have either more of a feature or extra features. Rather than try to fight power and feature creep, the goal of any live service game is to control and contain it as best they can. All things considered, I think Hoyo is doing a pretty good job at that for Honkai Star Rail. Yes, the game is power creeping in the sense that the ceiling is practically shot open, but several version 1 units have either gotten retroactively buffed or are still adequately clearing the game's content. They're not breaking any records, mind you, but if you're primarily concerned with getting the bare minimum to obtain all the rewards and not 0 cycle clearing or 80k scoring, then in that case, Star Rail's power scaling is not accelerating at such a rate to where old characters become completely unviable. However, a big part of the enjoyment of video games is to experience the full extent of what is possible. Even if you can complete all the game's content without the most optimal characters or tactics, being denied the full experience can alone be detrimental to one's enjoyment, which is why gacha games have the predatory reputation that they do. They deprive you of the full experience unless you pony up. And when it comes to gachas, the full experience is often the characters, bringing me to the topic of this video. A number of you may have seen that one graphic last year comparing how many units were released in version 1 for HSR compared to Genshin. It's a fairly noticeable difference. Bear in mind, version 1 was about the most characters Genshin released. Since then, in version 2, 3, and 4, the number has gone down. But so far, apart from skipping a 4-star, Star Rail has been releasing a consistent stream of units every version, and they appear to show no indication of slowing down. The question is, why is Star Rail making so many units? Like I said many times in the past, Honkai Star Rail's entire gameplay experience is purely combat. While Genshin allows for other forms of gameplay like overworld exploration or even smaller things like fishing, collecting, and even house building, 99% of your experience in Star Rail consists of battling. Therefore, the central part of the game entails working on your units and creating a bunch of different teams. I mean, for crying out loud, we have like 5 endgame modes, 3 of which go through cyclical updates. With that many different combat scenarios, you're unsurprisingly expected to have a bunch of units on deck, and with that in mind, they give us a bunch of units aimed at covering them. Notably, as of late, what's been happening is a focus on party slot fulfillment. See, back in version 1, the focus was mainly general coverage. With there not being many units available, the idea was to just release characters who can do general attacking, general buffing, and the like, represented by Lunai Danheng and Jingliu doing just that, or by tanks like Fushuan and Luocha who don't particularly cater towards a certain niche. In the interim though, they were planting seeds for future ideas. Kafka for damage over time, Topaz for follow-up attacks, things of that nature. They then acted on those expansions, leading to the creation of playstyles, which I suppose can be Star Rail's equivalent of elemental reactions in light of there being none. Instead of supercharging a single unit, the goal is to achieve a collective output, as is the case for follow-up attack teams counting the damage of 2 or sometimes 3 attackers, or break teams doing the same thing, or even damage over time as well. Naturally, as parties get more specialized and efficient, you need supplementary units who can do the same thing. The Harmony Trinity is a great example of this. Sparkle, Robin, and Runmei are all exceptionally powerful supports at a base level. They provide tons of damage for their team practically unconditionally, but from then on, they branch out into their own distinctions. Runmei break damage, Robin follow-up attacks, and Sparkle hyper carry. This also extends to sustain units. Aventurine is a follow-up attacker, Huohuo is a battery support, Gallagher is a break support, and I guess lingsha is also a break support if you want to put it that way. That is my inference on why Hoyo is releasing so many characters. They're pushing content out at a high frequency, and in response, they have to make a lot of different playstyles that need representatives. On one hand, this is a very good decision to make. Those who watch my Genshin content know how frustrated I am with the Geo and physical niche being totally neglected, as well as hybrid carries falling off prior to version 4. In Starl, they're giving us support for niches immediately instead of waiting 2 years to do so, at which point we would have written them off. Now if only they can give support for HP scaling units like Blade, that would be awesome, thanks. Objectively speaking, variety and option selection are always good. I think it's excellent for long-term sustainability that we have all these different ways to play, because it prevents the meta from becoming stale. During the winter, it might be follow-up attacks, during the spring it can be break teams, during the summer it could be hybrid carry, during the fall it can be damage over time, summons, what have you. Remember, it ties back to Honkai Star's core experience being combat. It's in Hoyo's best interest to spice it up as much as they can, especially given how one-dimensional its combat can be. Since every unit can only do so much on their own, strategy comes down to less what you do with the character and more who you pair them with. That can be really fun because you might run into a scenario that wants AoE follow-ups, prompting you to use Jade and Himeko. Another scenario you might want single target follow-ups, so you go feixiao, ratio, topaz. One situation you might want fire break damage, so you go Firefly. The next you might want physical damage, so you go Boothill. And with the influx of new characters, there's never a dull moment. You always have something to work on or something to work towards. As a progress-oriented gamer, that's my favorite thing about HSR, always having something to work towards because the game necessitates it. Not to say you can't just brute force your way through everything with that chron or whatnot, you most certainly can, and evidently people most certainly do. That being said, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. On the other hand, bluntly speaking, Honkai Star Rail is very high maintenance. Not in terms of dailies, on that front it's the lowest maintenance game by far given you can auto-battle everything, but like most gacha devs, Hoyo has a proclivity for tuning their endgame combat environments to whatever shiny new toy they're marketing at the time. For example, when Acheron came out, there was a huge focus on including her in MLC and Pure Fiction. When Firefly came out, all 3 endgame modes were catered towards break effect. With Yunli, feixiao, and lingsha all having follow-up attack based mechanics, cycle blessings are coinciding MOC, Epoch Shadow, and PF iterations entail follow-up attacks or frequency of attacks. Things get kinda tricky from here on out. Typically, even if you don't pull for the new character, assuming you have most of the existing cast, you should still be able to eke out a clear score sufficient enough to get all the rewards. It may not be a full point clear, but unless you're grossly underprepared, you'll be fine. But with there being 3 separate game modes, each with their own conduct, though they all share the same, I guess, motif of break, follow-up, or ultimate damage, your team may be sufficient for one game mode like MLC, but they may not be good for other game modes like PF, requiring you to have a lot more than just a couple units of every niche, thus putting a ton of pressure on players to pull for as many characters as possible, which can be difficult when they're constantly pumping out 2 5-stars per version, each one stronger than the last. To Hoyo's credit, as discussed in my free characters video, they've done a bang-up job hooking us up with a number of free hard hitters, March 8, Gallagher, Harmony MC, Ratio, and so on. The free pulls you get, along with the jades you accumulate per version, should be enough to where free-to-plays should more or less be okay if they play every day. But that circles back to my point of the game being very high maintenance. It can be demanding enough to have to keep up with Star Rail's rapidly changing endgame climate, but when you compound the additional thought of characters you spent a ton of jades and stamina on getting power crept by someone, that can feel like a big punch in the gut. I'm not saying that just because lingsha and Aventurine are direct upgrades to Gallagher and Japard respectively, suddenly the latter 2 are no longer usable, but you can draw a reasonable conclusion that if characters are getting visibly stronger one after another, it's safe to assume the content they're expected to be thrown at will also get tougher to further promote the need to get them. The character and playstyle variety in this game is somewhat counterbalanced by the combat leaving not much room for nuance, and so eventually it comes down to who can kill stuff faster, who can tank stuff better, who can buff you more, etc. I brought that up in my support video where even though technically the Harmony Trinity has its own specifications, their buffing capabilities at base are just so good that you have no practical reason to even consider using the other supports unless of course you don't have them. That will only continue to exacerbate over time. Gallagher is broken as hell, and then they added lingsha who can do most of what he can and then some. We've been seeing that all throughout the sustain category too. Aventurine and Huohuo can do so much more than Japard and Lota. Again, not to say the latter 2 are suddenly useless, but the chance of them eventually falling off in the future is higher than most people are comfortable with. It's a very tenuous balance to maintain, one that may not even have a midpoint offering a win-win for both sides. Star Rail's giving us higher numbers and more capability. On top of those shiny numbers being a reason to want to pull for them, one way they can sweeten the deal is by increasing the game's difficulty, making existing choices less efficient to use at a high level, causing the new, stronger units to feel that much more appealing. If they don't raise the game's difficulty, then there's much less reason to pull for new characters when your current roster is sufficient. So logically speaking, eventually they'll raise the difficulty ceiling if they want to market the new powerful characters. On one hand, you want to challenge the player to make them work towards goals and put in the time, resources, and effort to achieve them. On the other hand, you don't want the challenge to be suffocating so as not to damage the experience, especially when you take into account the means of completion being locked behind a paywall. Tons of players will love nothing more than to go deep into character and team building and whatnot, they just don't have the wherewithal to do so. And the last thing we want is for Honkai Star Rail to become a pay-to-win game, which I know all gachas are literally pay-to-win, that's kind of what they're known for, but overall you have to find that balance between making the game hard enough to give players a reason to log on and grind, but not too hard to where it alienates players, particularly those without disposable income. Do you need every character to have a full experience? No, but being denied from too many characters, which is the main focus of the game, can be a source of frustration for players, and every developer should minimize aspects of frustration because frustration leads to players giving up on the game. I also think one more issue is resource availability. This has always been a sore spot for the game. Unless you buy refreshes, it can take weeks to max out just a character's level, weapon, and traces, let alone equipping them with half-decent relics. Thankfully, with relics you can always take from one person and give them to another. For example, if you want to build Break Himeko, you can jack Firefly's Iron Cavalry set and give it to her for a moment. Or if you want to swap around relics between Acheron and Ratio since they both use Dead Waters, you should be good to go there. But overall, it's a huge resource and time commitment to get all these units geared up, so having 2 characters coming out every patch can be quite straining on Trailblaze power in addition to your wallets. Right now, my sentiments on Honkai Star Rail is that it's moving too fast. That can be good for players who go hard in the paint and like to pull for every character, but it can be bad for players who don't have the time or money to commit that much to the game. We can debate on whether or not a casual player should be allowed to comfortably complete endgame some other time, but right now you can fall behind quickly if you decide to take a break for a couple patches. Once more, the game isn't power creeping as fast as other gachas, but in regards to characters, we're seeing units one-upping each other fairly convincingly. It may not be happening right now, but I think by version 3, if they keep the pace they're going, and enemies accordingly get progressively bulkier and have more mechanics to watch out for, it will start to become more prevalent. In my humble opinion, I don't think the issue is power creep in and of itself. It's power creep in conjunction with how many units we're getting. There's nothing wrong with wanting to release a bunch of units, but when you make every single character top tier or super top tier, eventually it's going to scale too far too fast. If you think about it, the worst character we've gotten from the start of version 2 to now would probably be either Boothill or Jade, which is crazy to think about when Boothill and Jade are broken as shit in their own fields. If you think about how much they had to juice Firefly with just to put her on the same level as Acheron, they had to do the same thing with feixiao. Hoyo has to give new characters power equal to if not greater than what's currently running right now, otherwise much less people will go after them. And when this happens over and over and over again, even though it's not unsustainable now, it will be unsustainable later. If they want to keep maintaining the pace of 2 new 5-stars per version while making all of them strong, increasing resource abundance would be another solution. If players had more materials and more pulls, they would have the ability to keep up, therefore they would not miss out on all the new fun stuff and subsequently not have disappointing experiences that would discourage them from continuing to play. There are plenty of ways to navigate this, but I suppose to properly give an answer on this video topic, is Honkai Star Rail releasing too many characters? Yes, they are. What are your thoughts on this topic? Do you agree or disagree with my points? You're welcome to share in the comments down below. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @VarsFam, join my Discord server, and check out my other Honkai Star Rail discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.